Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very proud to rise on behalf of the people of Timmins-James Bay who've elected me and asked me to come and bring their concerns and review the legislation that we deal with at different times. And so I'm proud to rise today on Motion 559 on the question of working with charities and encouraging the ability of people to give to charities and getting that to the Finance Committee. And I think it's certainly an issue that we should bring forward to the Finance Committee. There will be certainly a number of questions about the efficacy of the approach that's being suggested, but I think that if we hear witnesses and we work with all four parties, we could actually move towards a better role for charities. I think of my riding of Timmins-James Bay, Mr. Speaker, and some of the phenomenal work that goes on. I'd like to begin by talking about the Lord's Kitchen, which is used to be in the basement of old Nativity Church before the bishop closed the parish down, but now it's over at St. Antoine's. The Lord's Kitchen, some might say it's a charity, but to me it's a community center where seniors, where young Aboriginal kids come, where families just come for weekly dinners. It's one of the most welcoming environments I've seen. I think of the work that goes on out of oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, it is still in the basement of Nativity Church. They moved the parish over to St. Antoine's. I think of Ed Lagoki in South Porcupine, who this is 10 years now that Ed Lagoki has been running the Samaritan Inn, the Good Samaritan Inn, and the amazing work they do in dealing with the homeless, because homelessness is not just a issue in urban centers. We see it in the north, and of course we see it in frightening numbers in our Aboriginal communities. So we see that level of grassroots charitable work, but you know, we have it at a number of levels that it shows the complexity of charitable giving in this country. For example, in South Timiskaming, the Literacy Council and the work that they do. We see it with groups like the Timmins Highland Dancers, who are raising money this week for the Heart and Stroke Foundation. We have the Cochrane-Timiskaming Children's Treatment Center, and they do amazing work with their integrated services for the Northern Children Program. All across the region of the vast region of Timmins-James Bay, there are people who are volunteering and who are doing so much of the work that needs to be done in order to make civil society a truly humane society, where people actually who are falling through the cracks who are cared for. We see it with the support for arts in our area. We see it for the cultural organizations in our area. So we want to encourage that people are able to continue giving money. I think, Mr. Speaker, when I look at this bill, one of the questions I have is that perhaps maybe a more efficient way of dealing with charities is to clear up who actually should be a charity and who shouldn't be, because there are many people competing for charities, and I'm thinking that some of them perhaps shouldn't be able to get charitable donations. And if we cleared that up, there might be a better pool of money for the people who are legitimate charities. One of the groups that I think of right off the top, of course, is the Fraser Institute. Now, the Fraser Institute claims that it's there to represent the free market, and of course the Fraser Institute attacks all manner of public institutions, and yet it does so under the guise of being a charity. And I look at where they get their money from, and it's very disturbing, Mr. Speaker, that ExxonMobil, the oil company, could funnel money through the Fraser Institute to do so-called studies on climate change. Well, we know what kind of climate change studies the Fraser Institute has come up with. They've attacked the Kyoto Protocol. Here's a quote from the climate change activists are exaggerating the linkage between human action and climate change. They are bought and paid for by ExxonMobil, so I certainly wouldn't want to have any more sweetheart deals for ExxonMobil being able to funnel money to the Fraser Institute. Another group, of course, who gives money to the Fraser Institute is Big Tobacco, Rothmans, Philip Morris. We see how the Fraser Institute, working as a front for Big Tobacco, led the fight, supposedly for freedom, against all manner of bylaws when it came to smoking bylaws in this country. And we know from the deaths of passive smoke how brutal it has been for the waitresses and the people who've worked in the service industry. And yet there was the Fraser Institute pocketing money from Rothmans, and then going out and being interviewed on radio and television as somehow a disinterested third party just giving their opinion. I don't have a problem with these right-wing think tanks. What I have a problem with is that they use charitable donations in order to take money from corporations to basically subvert a good public process. So, Mr. Speaker, when I look at a group like the Fraser Institute and their pals at Rothmans, Philip Morris, and Big Oil, I certainly don't want them to get another dime through charitable giving, because I think that it undermines the phenomenal work that legitimate charities do. So I would seek to my honourable colleague that perhaps if we cleaned out the bad apples who are misusing charitable numbers for political purposes, and then we would be able to ensure that the phenomenal work of, like, for example, the Hearing Society, you know, the society who deal with the blind, that the money that goes to them is so vital and important. I think of groups like the seizure and brain injury group in Timmins, who have done amazing work with such little resources. If they didn't have that charitable status, they wouldn't be able to carry on that work. I think of the groups all through Timiskaming that are dealing with the food banks. The Cochrane Food Bank in our region is a center for distribution of food throughout the north, and they help support the food banks in Iroquois Falls, in Timmins, in Englehart, New Liskeard, Kirkland Lake. And these are people who volunteer their time, who are there day after day. If you go into the Cochrane Food Bank on any given day, you'll see numerous volunteers. They are doing phenomenal work. So if there's a way that we can, through the Finance Committee, look at ensuring that these groups, like the Cochrane Food Bank, like the Heart and Stroke Foundation, like the Seizure and Brain Injury organizations in Timmins, that if we can aid them in their work through changing the tax measures, I certainly, Mr. Speaker, and the New Democratic Party would certainly be interested. But we certainly believe we need to close up the loopholes so the bad apples who are misusing charities on behalf of Big Oil and Big Tobacco and basically acting as a front for everything that this neocon conservative government spills on the Canadian public on any given day, that they shouldn't be hiding behind charities. They should actually have to go out and compete in the marketplace with their bogus ideas. And that if Rothmans want to give money to fronts like the Fraser Institute to help groups like the Conservative Party, that they actually have to go out and compete for that dollar for dollar. There shouldn't be any incentive for this kind of money through the back pocket, because it is a slap in the face to the volunteers and the people who do such good work and the people who give with their hearts day after day after day without thinking of the personal gain, unlike our friends at Rothmans, unlike our friends at the Fraser Institute, unlike our friends in the big oil industry who give money to the Fraser Institute and expect charitable money back and charitable breaks for usurping and subverting public process. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.